it's Liliana. In this lesson, we will be talking about preparing and getting ready to submit requests for your letters of recommendation. So we'll be covering the who, the how, and the when of recommendation letters, and we'll be discussing why all three of these components are very important. Okay, let's start with the who. When you're thinking about who you want to ask to write your letters of recommendation, you want to consider people who can speak to certain qualities that you have both as a student and as a person. So you will ask for 2 letters of recommendation. Make sure that you select 2 people who will not share the same information about you, because you want college admission staff to read information about you from a holistic viewpoint. You will want at least 1 recommender who can attest to your academic ability, such as a teacher or a school counselor. This person will speak to your academic curiosity, your intellectual progression, and your class work ethic. And then for your second recommender, you should have someone perhaps non-academic. And this can be one of your coaches, perhaps a community leader, or a supervisor, or even a youth minister. And this should be someone who can speak to your personal interests, your leadership skills, and activities outside of the classroom. Remember that the goal here is to choose someone who can complement and highlight aspects of you that might not easily be seen in your transcript, test scores, or your personal essay. And we have a special note here, which is we highly recommend that you do not ask someone who could be biased in supporting your admissions application. So don't ask a friend or a family friend or even a family member. This will not make your application stronger, nor will it be seen as favorable by the admissions staff. Okay, so please see the slide here for examples of qualities that recommenders can and should write about. So some common themes that people who write letters of recommendation often write about are the student's eagerness and level of comfort in participating in class, as well as their curiosity in a specific subject matter. So if you want to pursue a biology major in college, you should probably get a letter of recommendation from a teacher who taught science. You could also get a letter of recommendation from someone who can speak to your ability to overcome a challenge. And usually you want to pick someone who you have specific work experience or class experience with, who can show your ability to go above and beyond in a certain project or class assignment. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the when. So as far as timing goes, you've really got to plan ahead. Timing is everything. Remember that the folks that you're going to be asking to write you a letter of recommendation are likely very busy, and also they're probably already writing other letters of recommendation for other students during the same time frame that they'll be expected to write yours. So it's important for you to set a deadline for yourself of when you're going to ask these people for the letters of recommendation, and make sure that you do it early enough to give yourself enough time. It's generally a good rule of thumb to set a deadline that is at least 2 weeks before your application deadline. Remember, we're working towards UW-Madison's early action deadline of November 1st. So you should ask for your letters of recommendation to be completed by October 25th at the absolute latest. So if you're working backward, that means you would need to ask no later than October 11th for them to write you a letter of recommendation. But even that is kind of late. So to just make it easy, you should ask all the folks that you want to write you a letter of recommendation by September 30th, by the end of this month. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the how. How do you go about asking someone to write you a letter of recommendation? The first step, as we kind of alluded to earlier here, is to plan ahead. You want to determine your own timeline for requesting a letter, and also a deadline for you to receive that letter that's before the actual deadline for the college application. So when you actually ask a person to write you a letter of recommendation, you can ask to meet them in person, or you can send them an email with all the details. But either way, when you're asking, remember to be humble and never assume that someone will agree to write you a letter of recommendation. Okay, another thing to remember is to be as specific as you can possibly be. So don't assume that they know the date that the application is due by, or that you need the recommendation by. Make sure that you give them a deadline. Make sure that if there are specific qualities or things that you want them to mention in your letter of recommendation, that you let them know. I know that some students have provided sort of like a resume, what's called a brag sheet, and that's kind of where they have like a bullet point list of different accomplishments or things that they have done that they would like their recommenders to highlight in their letters. So if you wanted to provide a brag sheet to your professor or someone that you're asking for a letter, those can really help whoever's writing you a letter make a good one and say what you'd like them to say or include in their letter. Another thing is that if you sense any sort of hesitation from the person you're asking a letter for, you should probably just go ahead and ask someone else. If you haven't heard back in 1 week with a yes or a no that they will write you a letter, then you can follow up, or you can ask someone else. Along with that, if you don't see this person too regularly, or you feel like they might need a reminder, checking in on them, with a friendly reminder is never a bad idea. And you should definitely do that if the deadline is approaching and you haven't heard from them. And then the final thing is to make sure that you send them a thank you letter. This can be a handwritten note. Those are usually the best, but an email is also good. Okay, next we have, how do you submit these requests? So especially if you're going to ask someone to write you a letter via email, you'll want to include instructions and probably a link so that they know where to go and how to submit the letter of recommendation. So depending on what application system you use, this will be different. If you're using the Common application, you will have to submit a request for a recommendation through the Common System app. But if you're using the UW System application, there's actually a link that you can share with the person that you're asking, and they can just click on the link and submit their letter that way. I've also included the link here at the bottom of this presentation in case you need it. Okay, let's do a little recap. So to summarize, you'll definitely need 2 letters of recommendation. one from an academic perspective, and then the other one from a non-academic perspective. Next, you'll want to consider your timeline and ask as early as possible. For UW-Madison, you all have the early action deadline of November 1st for all of your application materials. So if you remember, we said that it's good to ask for your letters of recommendation no later than September 30th. Also, when you're asking for these letters, make sure that you include your intent. Make sure that you tell the person where you're applying to, and if you can give them any instructions on how they will submit your letter of recommendation, that usually really helps them. And next, make sure that you follow up with your recommenders as the deadline approaches. It can be really nerve-wracking if you're closely approaching the deadline and you haven't heard from your recommenders, or maybe they're on vacation, so you want to get those letters in early as possible, just like the rest of your application materials, so you're not too stressed out when the deadline is coming. Alright, and then just remember to send a thank you note as soon as the application is complete and submitted. Writing a letter of recommendation is no small task, and especially if you're asking one of your teachers, they probably are writing lots of other letters for other students. So you want to be mindful of their time. You want to show your gratitude and thank them. Yeah, those are the recap tips. All right, folks, you are all ready and prepared to request your letters of recommendation in the correct way and in a timely fashion. If you have specific questions about UW admissions, I've included their email here, so you can definitely reach out with an email. But if you have questions about this class, or if you'd like any of my help or Brenda's help asking for a letter of recommendation, just let us know. Thank you.